now let's get to, now that you have a general sense of how they're going to attack, let's get to their first piece of ammunition. The Republicans have found a piece of tape on Sotomayor, and they are ecstatic over it. Now, let's show it to you, tell you what the Republicans are saying, and tell you what the reality is. Let's watch. This is clip number 5.
All of the legal defense funds out there, they're looking for people with Court of Appeals experience, because Court of Appeals is where policy is made. And I know this is on tape, and I should never say that because we don't make law. I know. Okay, I know. I'm not promoting it, and I'm not advocating it. Okay.
The Court of Appeals is where policy is made. We got her. She just admitted that they're making the law and they're making policy. Well, all right. Now, here's a couple of things. First of all, she said, I'm not advocating for it. I'm not saying it's the right thing. Now, that doesn't count, right? No. That part we'll ignore. She's just saying that's the reality. Now, when you ask actual conservative jurists, people who are in the legal field, they say, obviously, what she's referring to is, in the lower courts, they don't really get to establish precedent. They take the precedent that has been handed down by the higher courts, and they apply that, right? When you go to the Court of Appeals, well, that's where you establish precedent, because the Supreme Court takes very few cases, so it leaves it into the hands of those appeals courts to make precedent. Now, you can say precedent, you can say policy, but in reality, it's the same thing. And Huffington Post, Sam Stein did a great piece where he quoted a bunch of law professors throughout the country all saying, duh, of course, that's exactly what she's referring to. And to say that that doesn't happen would be to say that the sun doesn't rise. And that doesn't mean that they're saying, okay, now, subsection of this act shall be, 1B3 and la la la, and they write it down. No, she's saying that that's where they make precedent, and that's basically how the court system works. So it's an absolutely nonsense line of attack, and of course, that's not going to stop the conservatives. They're going ballistic over this. Now, let me tell you what the reality is on, in my opinion, on what it means to make policy. What is going too far and actually legislating from the bench, and what is interpreting, okay? Because this is going to be the central fight here over this nomination. Look, I used to call myself a judicial conservative, and I was, in fact, a member of the Federalist Society, which is a very, very conservative legal group. Back when I was in law school, I went to one of their conferences. It freaked me out, okay, but that's a whole separate story. But overall, I agreed with their philosophy. Now, back then, my thought was, look, if it's in the Constitution, it's in the Constitution. If it's not in the letter of the law, it's not in the plain intent of the founders, then it's a no-go, right? Since then, I have moderated my views a little bit. Now, I wouldn't call myself a liberal at all in terms of legal philosophy, but I would really tell you that I am a moderate. And what do I mean by that? And I'm going to prove it to you in a second. Look, the courts have to interpret the law. They have to. It's not... So when you say, well, look, for example, gay rights are not in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't say anything about gay rights. But when you have an issue that comes before the court and says, hey, look, there's a law now that's been made outlawing gay rights, they've got to interpret the Constitution. What does it mean for freedom, for example? Does it mean the freedom to be able to have intercourse with anyone you like? Does that fall within the sphere of privacy or not? Is there even a sphere of privacy? These are all things that have to be interpreted. You can't just say, hey, you know what? What's in the Constitution is in the Constitution. It doesn't answer the question. So you have to make a decision on it one way or another. And there, you could say they're making policy, and you could say they're interpreting the law. And it's really a fine line as to where it falls. Now, can you go too far in interpreting the law, where you wind up actually making the law? Yes, you can. Now, my example, and I'm sure this will be controversial for some people, is Roe versus Wade. I think that was going too far, and I think that it was making law. I mean, Justice Blackmun wrote in 3 trimesters. He's like, here's what you're allowed to do in the first trimester, here's what you're allowed to do in the second trimester of the pregnancy, and here's what you're allowed to do in the third trimester. What? That's not in the Constitution. Okay, you can say, hey, you know what, there's a sphere of privacy, and you can have an argument whether that's in the Constitution or not, but that's a legitimate argument, in my opinion. And you could say one thing or another about abortion, but you can't write a whole law telling me what I can do and what I can't do in the different trimesters. That's where you've crossed the line, in my opinion, into making law rather than interpreting law, right? So I think there is a line there. And that's why I view myself as a moderate. Now, look, the ultimate result of Roe versus Wade as a policy I loved. I think Justice Blackmun should have been a senator because he nailed it. Okay, and I think as far as policy, I like it a lot. But as far as a Supreme Court case, I think it was decided wrong. So I fall in the middle here as to where you draw that line. Now, the question will be, does Judge Sotomayor fall on the line where I think, you know what, she's making law here, she's not interpreting it. Or, look, she's done nothing but fair interpretation of it. You might agree here or you might disagree there, but she's doing the best she can under the circumstances. I think that's the question that has to be ferreted out. And if the conservatives made a realistic effort to try to find out the answer to that question, and they said, look, here you can see how she's going too far, here's the case that I'm referring to, and here's where she stepped over the line, I'd be very open to hearing that. Now, so far they have not. I mean, give them time, of course, they're going to look through all of her cases, and she's got a lot. But this first piece of evidence that they have her on tape that they're going crazy over is nothing. Absolutely nothing. It is simply referring to the fact that the appeals courts make precedent, which another word for it is policy, and everyone knows that. So that's the problem I always have with conservatives. It seems to me that they don't come at it from the right place. Like they're not having a fair and reasonable argument. They're coming at it instantly from, let's twist the facts, let's make it something that it's not, and then try to smear her. If they approached it from a much more reasonable light, they might convince more people. And by the way, basing things on fact usually helps your case, especially if you're talking about the law.